unbeknownst to Alfred Weber, Dr. Alfred Weber, Juris Doctor, yeah. When he approached the White House, Jimmy Carter had already initiated their own study, right? Coming directly out of the White House, was underway, right? And there are a number of principles involved in that. The one I wanted to give here was Marcia Smith, who's now retired. I simply could not get to her, or she just simply would not return my approach. I made about a dozen. It's all right. We have one of the principles involved in that study, the one that Alfred did not know about when he approached. And that person is, of course, Danny Sheehan. So, Danny, if you could give us a quick sense of that study, how it was initiated, and, of course, how you entered into it.
Okay. Well, what happened is that how I got involved in this was that actually during the campaign, I had become chief counsel for the United States Jesuit headquarters in 1976, and the campaign was still going on then. The campaign began between Ford and Carter, and I helped organize a thing called the Washington Interreligious Staff Council, which was the meeting of the heads of the national offices of all 54 major religious denominations in the United States that have permanent offices in Washington. And we had developed a set of task forces. And I was, as the chief counsel for the Jesuits, was on the task force on foreign policy. And I went over to meet with Stuart Eisenstadt. Stuart Eisenstadt was the policy chief for Jimmy Carter during his campaign. And I went over and met with him at his little office he had set up there off DuPont Circle, and talked with him about the fact that the religious denominations were outraged by the fact that the United States was giving massive military aid to major dictatorships around the world, despite the fact that there were consistent findings of their violation of the human rights of their own citizens. So we actually got a meeting set up between Stuart Eisenstadt and the heads of 54 religious denominations to talk with them about getting Jimmy Carter to adopt, if he were elected president, a policy pursuant to which he would cut off all foreign military aid to all dictatorships if there was a determination that they were engaged in a systematic violation of the human rights of their own citizens. That's how I got to meet Stu Eisenstadt, get to talk with their internal staff, etc. And when Carter was elected, he actually implemented that. And that was the policy pursuant to which they cut off all the funding for Anastasio Somoza in Nicaragua. And he fell from power within 6 months. And they also cut off the military funding to the Shah of Iran. And he fell from power within the year. And that was, of course, the origins of the Iran-Contra scandal that proceeded later, because the governments that ascended into power that took the place of Somoza was the Sandinista government, and the Central Intelligence Agency deemed them to be terrorists because they had undertaken military operations against the government of Somoza. And they also designated as terrorists the people that had overthrown the Shah of Iran. And so the CIA, under the directorship of its then director of covert operations, Theodore Shackley, under Ford, had designated both of those governments as terrorist governments and was attempting to overthrow them. So that's how I got to know all those people. And what happened is that after Carter was elected in November of 1976, in December of 1976, as it turns out, he went and held a meeting with Theodore Shackley, and then later with George Bush Sr., because George Bush Sr. was the CIA director at that time. And so President-elect Jimmy Carter met with George Bush, the director of Central Intelligence Agency, and asked George Bush to turn over to him when he came to the office of presidency, to turn over to him all the briefing documents on the UFO incidents and the ET issues that were known by the Central Intelligence Agency. George Bush refused to do it. and said that he would only agree to give Jimmy Carter those files if Jimmy Carter agreed to appoint George Bush to be the continuing CIA director under him. Jimmy Carter refused to do that. And so George Bush refused to give him any of the documents about extraterrestrial intelligence or the UFO phenomenon, and told him that if he wanted to get these, he was going to have to contact Congress, the Science and Technology Committee of the House of Representatives, and get the Science and Technology Committee to contact the Congressional Research Service and get them to go through the normal procedures of trying to get them declassified. Because Bush was afraid that President Carter was going to make public these documents. And so Bush was refusing to take responsibility for that, and so he directed President-elect Carter to the procedure by means of which declassification took place. Well, Carter, when he became president on January 21st, 1977, he actually reached out and contacted the chair of the Science and Technology Division of the House of Representatives and asked them specifically to contact the Congressional Research Service, the Science and Technology Division, headed up by Marshall Smith, and to have them undertake to declassify all of the materials. Well, I was contacted. It was summertime by the time I got contacted in '77. It's like June or something like that. I'll tell you the whole story. I was actually over having dinner with Rosie Chalk. Rosie Chalk was the head of the National Science Academy, and we were sitting talking, and she said that you are this kind of inveterate lawyer that's doing all this stuff against the government and all that. Have you ever thought about being anything else? And I said, well, I actually was going to be an astronaut. An astronaut? And I said, yes. I said, because I wanted to participate in the whole program of reaching out to people from other civilizations and getting to establish contact with them. And she said, I'm flabbergasted. I never would have guessed that. She said, here you are, the chief counsel for the Jesuits in Washington, and you wanted to be an astronaut. She said, well, listen, there's a very dear friend of mine by the name of Marcia Smith, and she's the director of the Science and Technology Division over at the Congressional Research Service, the Library of Congress, and they've just been tasked to do this major study about UFOs and extraterrestrials. She said, I want to have her contact you. So about the next Monday, Marcia Smith contacts me and asks me to meet her over on the Hill to have lunch, and we went over and I sat down and talked with her. And it turns out that even though she's just a dyed-in-the-wool conservative Republican, which shocked me because she was actually a baby boomer. I didn't know we had any. But it turns out that she's a closet Trekkie. And she just loved Star Trek and thought it was the most fantastic thing ever. She had stuff up all around her house. And so she had gotten this golden opportunity to help direct this thing. So she asked me if, in my capacity as the legal counsel for the Jesuits, the largest order of the Catholic Church in the world, if I would contact the head of the Vatican Library over in Rome, who's also a Jesuit, and see if we could get him to give me access to the classified sections of the Vatican Library to find out what the UFO and ET stuff was that was available there. So I went back and met with Father Bill Davis, who's the director of our office, and he contacts the board, and said, yes, that you can do that. So I wrote him this letter, and much to my surprise, he wrote a letter back saying, no, that we couldn't have any access to this. So I said, well, let me write a second letter. And I said, look, let me explain what this really is. President Carter has actually seen one of these UFOs back in '69. He actually filed a report about it, an official report in '73. He's the President of the United States. He wants to find out about this information. But he has to get this information. So I'd like to get the information out of the Vatican to help give to him during the study. And he wrote back and he said, no, you can't have it. So I was completely flabbergasted. So I called Marcia Smith and said, sorry, I'm not able to get this. So she said, well, that was a good try. A few weeks go by, and Marcia called me back. And she said, look, the Congress of the United States has just cut half of all of the budget for the SETI program at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And they're all freaked out, and the scientists over there, they want to get their money back, and there are these rules about anybody who's in a government program, actually going to Congress and lobbying for money. They're not allowed to do that. But someone told the Pentagon about that, right? But the bottom line is that they didn't feel free to be able to go do this. So she said, look, I want to put together, she said, some people to go and meet with the congressman in the Congress to try to persuade them to put the money back in for SETI if you'll do that. So I said, sure, I'll do that. And so she put me together with Rusty, and some of the other astronauts, and we went around and talked to all these people. And there I was, the head lobbyist for the Jesuit order, and going to talk to all these guys. And I wasn't promising them sanctifying grace or anything if they would help us, but they did anyway. And so we ended up getting all the money put back into the budget for SETI. And so she called me and she said, this was really fabulous. And it turns out that the top 50 scientists at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory that are in SETI wanted me to come and give them a 3-hour closed-door seminar on the theological implications of contact with extraterrestrial civilization. And so I said to her, look, if I'm going to do that, I'd like to be able to get access to some of the documentation that you are getting in the declassified sections of all this, and to prepare myself for this seminar. And she said, okay, well, what do you want? And I knew right away. It didn't take me 2 seconds. I said, I want to see the classified sections of Project Blue Book. And she said, oh, I don't think we're going to be able to do that. I don't think that they'll do that. And I said, well, let's ask them to see if they will. And so she writes this letters up and stuff. She contacts them and wants to get them declassified. And what they agreed to do is they agreed to bring the classified sections of Project Blue Book and bring them over to the Library of Congress. They actually put them in a basement office in the new wing of the Library of Congress, which is across the street from the regular Library of Congress. Brand new, there wasn't anybody in it. There was nobody in the offices or anything yet. They contacted me on a Saturday morning. It must have been July or so by this time. I go over, and I go over to the new wing of the office, the building. There's nobody there. There's a guard at the door. And I tell them that I'm Daniel Sheehan from the Jesuit office, and they made me show my identification and all that, and he checked his little list and said, okay, come on in. So I go in, and he said, you're going to go down these stairs, down to this. So I go down at the elevator, actually, and I come out down in the basement. I walk down the hall, and here's this room down at the end, and there are these 3 guys, all in suits, standing there at the door, and I showed them identification, and they took all identification. They said, okay, here's the room. You have a limited time. You can go in there and take a look at this stuff, but you can't bring anything with you. I had a yellow pad under my arm, famous yellow pad. I had the yellow pad under my arm, and so I put down my briefcase, and they check it all in there, and I turn around, and they say, you can't take any notes or anything. So I said, all right, so I go on in. And I said, I get to look at this. So I go in, and I start leafing through a whole bunch of what they had in there. Is they had there must have been 40 or 50 boxes, like shoebox size boxes of microfiche in there. And they had those old-timey tin microfiche machines, you crank them on the side, like usually in the old libraries and stuff, with real high-tech stuff, right? And so, and then they had a little 8mm camera machine over there. So I was trying to figure out, I didn't know, when he said I had limited time, I didn't know how limited my time was. So I started looking in these boxes, and I take these little microfilms out, and I put them on the thing, and I start cranking through them, and I'm looking at all kinds of documents, and I'm saying, I don't know if I'm going to get time to read through all these documents to find anything. I'm going to look for some pictures. So I started looking through these things for pictures, and I must have been into the third or fourth box of these things, looking at these things, and I hit upon these pictures. And here's this set of pictures, and it's a photograph of a UFO. There's no doubt about what it is. And it's hit in this field. And it's got snow. There's all snow on the field. And it's got this big trench dug across the field, and it's stuck in the snowbank. And it's sticking up like a 45-degree angle, stuck in this big bank, mud bank, like covered by snow. It turns out, as I start cranking through these and looking at one picture after another, there's all kinds of U.S. Air Force personnel all around this thing. And they've got these hoods on with a little fur around the things. They got their name tags on it. So I'm looking at this thing, and I finally crank over to it. And there's you can see there's one guy walking around with the different pictures taking film of this thing.
with an old kind of film camera looking at this thing. And so I'm looking at it and I come to a picture where there's a close-up of this vehicle. And I look at it and I think I could see that right by where the little dome is that's on top of this saucer thing, I thought I could see some kind of writing or something. So I started cranking through these pictures to see if I could get a close-up picture of it. Sure enough, there was a close-up of this particular thing. So what I did is I looked all around like this, and they weren't looking, so I opened up the yellow pad to the cardboard section of it like this, and I put the cardboard section under this big overhead deal, and I cranked the thing down so it fit immediately onto the cardboard backing, and I traced, what the little symbols were, and I traced them, and they looked like this. You can't really see it, but they were a series of lines going in strange directions with dots and little umlauts and stuff next to them, etc. But there were like there must have been 12 of these. And so what I did is I physically traced right over the top of them. And I folded my little yellow pad back up like this, and I put it down like that. I put the stuff back in the box, and I went over, I put it away, and said, that's it. I'm getting out of here before they know I've got this, right? So I take the little thing, I put it back under my arm like this, and I walk out to the door, and I go, okay, thanks, guys, that was really cool, and can I get my briefcase back? And they said, hey, here's your briefcase, and I went over to get it. And just as I touched the briefcase, this one guy said, what's that? You've got under your arm there. And I said, what? And he says, the yellow pad under your arm. I said, oh, that's just the yellow pad I had. He says, well, I told you couldn't take any notes, he said. And he picks it up, and he leafs through all the pages of the thing, looking like this, and he never looked at the cardboard in the inside. And he hands it back to me like that. So I put it back under my arm, and I walked out of there. And I go back to the office, and I got a hold of Father Bill Davis, the director of the office, and I said, you won't believe this, look what I just found out about. And I explained this whole thing to him. And he said, look, he said, I've never told you, there's something I ought to show you. And he goes over to his desk, and he pulls open the drawer, and he takes out a photograph of a UFO. And it was taken by his sister's husband, who was in the tower in Seattle, Washington Air Traffic Control. That one of his best friends had taken this picture, was an airline pilot, and gave it to him. He said, I never was going to tell anybody about this, but I think you should have this, he said. And so he gave it to me.